What would your younger self say about how your family turned out?
When I bought that beach apartment, I didn't throw a housewarming party, didn't call my parents, didn't even text my brother. I took one photo, bare feet on warm tile, coffee mug in one hand, wide ocean stretching out past the glass balcony, and I posted it online without a single word. No caption. No location tag. No smiley face or inspirational quote. Just peace. That was all I wanted to share. Within 12 hours, my mom texted me, "Seriously? This feels personal." And that was the moment it all snapped into focus, not just the guilt trip in her message, but the decades that led up to it, all those years of being the quiet one, the understanding one, the one who made excuses for the way they loved me less while insisting they didn't. I used to believe them, Back when I was small and still thought fairness was just a matter of time, I clung to the words they fed me like gospel. "It's not that we love Jake more, sweetheart. He just needs more attention right now. Or, we're doing what we can afford this year. Things are tight." Always said with that soft sigh and the tilt of the head that made it sound like sacrifice. But it never looked like sacrifice when my brother got surprise trips every summer, and I got a pat on the back and a card with a 20 tucked inside. I remember this one year, I must have been 15, Jake 18, they sent him to Italy for 2 weeks with his best friend's family. Apparently the friend's dad had airline miles and my parents just had to cover a few things, which, looking back, must have meant hundreds, maybe thousands, but they brushed it off like they'd bought him a movie ticket. I remember standing in the hallway while he zipped up his suitcase, practically vibrating with excitement. He showed me his passport and said, "You'll get one too someday," and I nodded like I believed it. Like someday was coming for me. That same summer, on my birthday, I got a sweatshirt from the clearance rack at Target. It was navy blue with white letters that spelled out a college I hadn't even heard of. Mom said, "It's cozy, right?" I saw it and thought of you. I smiled. Said thanks. I even wore it. But I remember lying on my bed later, running my fingers over the stitched letters, and wondering what kind of person inspires a half-price hoodie while their sibling inspires 2 weeks in Florence. That was the year it started getting harder to swallow the difference. When we were younger, it was easier to write off the imbalance. Jake was more athletic, more outgoing, the one who needed new cleats or a tutor or got invited to things. I was quieter, got good grades without help, never asked for much, and they used to tell me I was low maintenance, like it was some kind of medal. I didn't realize until much later that being low maintenance just meant easier to neglect. High school only sharpened the contrast. He got a car for graduation, used, but still a car, while I was told I could borrow Mom's when I really needed it. His dorm room was fully furnished by move-in day, while I had to thrift most of mine and figure out the rest with leftover birthday money. But every time I raised an eyebrow or made a comment, they'd pull out that tired old line, "We're doing what we can, honey." It's not about favoritism. Jake just has different needs. Maybe they thought I'd forget. Maybe they counted on my silence being permanent. I don't know. But over the years, I got very good at pretending it didn't sting. When he went to New York with friends for New Year's, and they wired him spending cash, I said nothing. When he moved back home at 26 after losing his job, and they renovated the basement, just to give him some space, I bit my tongue until it bled. When I called them to share that I got promoted and Mom changed the subject to how Jake was finally finding himself again, I hung up with a smile in my voice and a brick in my chest. There's this myth in families, especially the kind where the dysfunction hides behind holiday cards and polite small talk, that silence equals strength. That being the one who understands means you've somehow matured beyond your needs. But the truth is, silence is often just the easier choice. It buys peace for everyone else. It lets them keep pretending. And I let them pretend for a long time. But the shift started slowly, a few years ago when I stopped asking them for anything. No help with rent. No calls when I was sick. No requests for advice. I started building my own little world outside of their reach. I worked hard, kept my head down, made smart choices. And then, one morning over coffee and an email from a recruiter, I got the kind of offer that changes everything. A new job, a better city, and a signing bonus that most people dream of. 6 figures, clean. I remember staring at the number on the screen and thinking, don't say a word. Not because I wanted revenge, at least not then, but because I didn't want this win to be shared. Not with people who only ever showed up for someone else's victory. So I said nothing. Moved quietly. Found the apartment I'd been picturing in my head since that summer Jake went to Italy and I wore a hoodie like a consolation prize. A place by the beach, sunlight in every room, just far enough from the chaos. I bought it without a second opinion, signed every paper myself, and when the keys hit my hand, I didn't cry, I exhaled. The kind of exhale that comes after holding your breath for 20 years. And then, because the moment deserved something, anything, I snapped a photo, feet up, coffee mug, that clean blue line of the horizon, and posted it. No fanfare. No gloating. Just truth. The message came that night, and I stared at it like it was written in another language. Seriously? This feels personal. The irony was so loud it was almost funny. After all these years, all the things that weren't personal, the empty birthdays, the lopsided love, the casual dismissal of everything I did right, they only noticed when I finally did something for myself. But the real story didn't start with that beach view. It started with a lie, wrapped in good intentions, told over and over until it became my reality. A lie called, "We're just doing what we can afford." And it took me nearly 3 decades to realize it wasn't about what they could afford. It was about who they chose to spend it on. There comes a moment, not loud, not dramatic, just a quiet breaking point, when you stop trying to reinterpret the same old story in ways that hurt less, when you finally let yourself admit that maybe the people you've spent your life defending would never, not in 100 years, do the same for you. And for me, that moment didn't come during some shouting match or teary confrontation. It came one night while I sat in my tiny apartment, scrolling through yet another set of photos from my brother's latest recovery trip, this time a week-long cruise through the Caribbean that Mom had planned for him to reset after such a hard year. Even though he was 31 years old, unemployed by choice, and still living rent-free in the finished basement of our childhood home, complete with the new sectional couch and 65-inch television they bought him, just to make things feel more stable. I remember staring at the photo of him holding a cocktail in a pineapple, some ridiculous grin on his face, ocean behind him, tan lines forming on his nose, and thinking, hard year for who? Because in the same stretch of time, I had worked 60-hour weeks to meet my deadlines, navigated 3 rounds of corporate layoffs without flinching, and battled a stress-induced stomach ulcer that no one even knew about because I didn't have the time or energy to call home and explain it. And even if I had, what would they have said? Probably something like, well, you always push yourself so hard, followed by some comment about how Jake was finally reading again, or had taken up yoga, or was trying to cook vegetarian. As if his attempt to sauté kale was on the same level as me keeping a roof over my own head without asking them for a single cent. The problem was never the money itself. I never cared that they had more to give him. What gnawed at me quietly, relentlessly, was the way they acted like my strength excused them from having to care at all. Like the fact that I never fell apart meant I didn't deserve support, or attention, or even acknowledgement. And when I did bring it up, on the rare occasions I let the resentment bubble up into something I couldn't swallow, they treated it like a personal attack. Why are you making this a competition? Mom would ask, her voice all wounded innocence, while Dad sat silent beside her, pretending he hadn't heard. Jake's just been going through a lot, she'd add, as if the phrase itself was a permanent get-out-of-responsibility-free card. As if I hadn't been going through just as much, if not more, without anyone even noticing. There's this kind of gaslighting that happens in families like mine, where they don't yell or insult you directly, but instead twist reality so gently, so persistently, that you start to question your own memory. I can't count the number of times I was told I was too sensitive, or that I was reading into things, even when the imbalance was plain as day. When Jake forgot my birthday 2 years in a row, and they brushed it off with, "He's just not good with dates." When I flew across the country to attend Mom's 50th birthday, and they barely acknowledged I was there, too busy showing off the surprise custom watch they'd gifted Jake for no particular reason other than he's been through a rough patch. When I got promoted to team lead at work and told them over dinner, and they responded with polite nods before asking if I'd be free to help Jake prep for his next job interview, even though he hadn't had a real job in nearly 2 years. You want to believe that they're just distracted, or that they don't realize how it feels. You tell yourself that if you just keep being good, keep being the dependable one, the responsible one, the one who never complains, then eventually they'll see you. But that day never comes. And somewhere along the line, without even meaning to, you start shrinking parts of yourself to fit the story they've already written for you. The story where Jake is the center and you're the background, the reliable supporting character who holds things together while he figures himself out. Lauren was the first person who ever said it out loud to me. We were sitting in her living room, splitting a cheap bottle of wine after a long week, and I'd just told her about Jake's cruise. I must have been rambling, making the usual excuses, trying to laugh it off like I always did. But she put down her glass, looked me dead in the eye, and said, "You know they don't want you to win, right?" And I froze. Because that wasn't something I had let myself consider, not really. Not in a serious way. But once she said it, it was like a window opened in my brain and I finally saw what was inside. It wasn't that they hated me. It wasn't even that they loved Jake more in the loud, obvious ways. It was subtler than that, and somehow worse. They needed me to stay in my lane, to keep being small and grateful and easy to manage, so that they could keep pouring everything they had into him without feeling like they were failing someone else. My success made them uncomfortable because it couldn't be ignored, and ignoring me had always been their safest option. That's why, when the email from the recruiter landed in my inbox a few weeks later, I didn't tell anyone. Not a word. Not even Lauren, not at first. The role was bigger than anything I'd ever imagined, head of product development for a mid-sized tech firm, full relocation package, and a signing bonus that could pay off half a mortgage in some places. I reread the offer 3 times just to make sure I wasn't misreading it, that there wasn't some catch, some fine print that would pull the rug out from under me. But it was real. And for the first time in my adult life, I felt what it was like to be wanted. Not out of obligation or convenience, but because someone actually saw what I could do and said, "We want you." So I said yes. Quietly. Gracefully. And with no ceremony at all. I gave my 2 weeks' notice, wrapped up my projects, packed up my studio apartment, and started looking for places near the coast. But not just any place. I wasn't interested in cookie-cutter condos or trendy rentals with rooftop grills. I wanted something permanent. Something that would be mine in every possible way. Because I knew long before the beach view, long before the photo, long before the guilt-laced message from my mother, I knew that if I ever got the chance to win, really win, I'd do it without telling them. Not because I was hiding, but because I was done asking for their permission to be happy. And somewhere, deep down, I think I wanted them to feel what I'd felt for so long, to be left out of the celebration. To wonder what they'd missed. To finally notice my silence and realize what it cost them. There's a certain freedom in not needing to tell anyone your next move, a quiet and deeply satisfying kind of strength that only comes after years of making yourself smaller, after decades of bending to fit someone else's narrative, after being labeled the good one or the stable one or, worse, the independent one, as though that word, dressed up in praise, wasn't just another excuse for why no one thought to check if you were actually okay, or if maybe, just maybe, you were tired of carrying the weight of your own silence. And when that signing bonus cleared, hitting my account with the kind of finality that didn't require applause or permission, I didn't celebrate in the traditional way, not with champagne, not with confetti or phone calls or a post announcing the next chapter. Instead, I opened my laptop, sat back in my kitchen chair, and started browsing real estate listings along the coast, letting the cursor hover over every oceanfront condo and sun-drenched studio like I was tracing the edges of a life I'd always been told was too expensive to dream of. I kept everything quiet. No texts to friends. No mentions at work beyond the basic logistics of the job transition. No long goodbye speeches. I moved through those weeks like someone pulling off a slow, deliberate heist, packing only what I loved, selling the rest, making lists in a notebook with no name on the cover. all the while holding tight to this strange and powerful sense that I was building something that no one else could take credit for or ruin. Every decision was mine, and every dollar I spent felt like reclaiming something I hadn't even realized was stolen, the right to be happy without explanation. The apartment I found wasn't the most glamorous or the most modern. It didn't need to be. It had charm in the ways that mattered. Wide windows that spilled light across the floors in the early morning, a balcony just big enough for a table and 2 chairs, and a view of the ocean that felt like it belonged in a dream I wasn't allowed to have when I was younger. The first time I stepped inside, keys still warm from the realtor's hand, I didn't walk around pointing at where the furniture would go or make a mental list of improvements. I just stood there, barefoot on the cool tile, and let the silence wrap around me like something sacred, something earned. I didn't post the photo right away. That came later. First, I moved in piece by piece, slowly and intentionally, like someone building a life from the ground up, not the kind of life you show off to family members out of some misplaced need for approval, but the kind you create when you finally understand that validation from people who never saw you clearly is worth less than the sunlight hitting your own damn floor. I bought a couch I actually liked, not one that was practical or recommended by someone else. I filled the kitchen cabinets with mismatched mugs and overpriced tea I'd always talked myself out of buying. I played music in the evenings, barefoot again, swaying to old records while the wind moved through the balcony door and reminded me that I was alive, not just surviving. And then, one Sunday morning, coffee in hand, sun pouring in, nothing in the air but the low hush of waves and the occasional gull, I took the photo. It wasn't staged. I didn't clean or fix my hair or even adjust the lighting. I just lifted my phone, pointed it down at my crossed legs, the ceramic mug, and the edge of the sea, and I hit post. No caption. No filters. No cute little new beginnings speech. I wanted it to speak for itself. I wanted it to exist in the world like I finally did, without context, without apology, without anyone else's fingerprints on it. What I didn't expect, though maybe I should have, was the speed and precision of the reaction. Less than 12 hours later, her name lit up on my screen, the familiar gray bubble of a message from a woman who had mastered the art of guilt as an expression of love. Seriously? This feels personal. That's all she wrote. No congratulations. No curiosity. No warmth. Just that thinly veiled accusation, as though my silence was somehow a betrayal, as though the absence of forewarning was a weapon I had sharpened just to wound her. And in that moment, staring at her words on the screen, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, maybe ever. Not rage. Not even hurt. But clarity. A sharp, undeniable awareness that this was never about the money. Not really. Not about the trips they paid for or the excuses they made. It was about the fact that I had dared to live outside their expectations, that I had stepped beyond the role they'd written for me and into a life they didn't approve, not because it was wrong or reckless, but because it didn't include them. I could have responded with something kind, something polished, something that smoothed over the jagged edge of that message like I always used to. I could have said, I didn't mean it that way, or I just wanted to enjoy it before sharing. But I didn't. I stared at the blinking cursor for a long time, then typed only this. It wasn't meant to be personal. But maybe it should have been. And then I put my phone down and went outside. I let the breeze hit my face and the sun warm my skin, and I didn't look back. I didn't check if she read it. I didn't wait for her response. Because this life I had quietly, patiently, stubbornly built was mine. And for once, that was enough. There's a power in silence that most people will never understand, especially the ones who mistake quiet for weakness. They think that because you don't fight back, because you don't scream or demand or cry in public, that you're not carrying anything worth noticing. But silence is heavy. It's layered. It's deliberate. And sometimes, it's the only way to make them see what they refused to see when you were speaking. I had spoken. For years, in the softest voice, in the most generous language. And they never heard me. So now, I let the silence do the talking. And it spoke volumes. There's something uniquely disorienting about receiving a text message from your own mother that lands like a knife slipped between your ribs, not deep enough to kill you, but sharp enough to make you pause, to tilt your head slightly and think, so this is how far we've fallen. When that notification buzzed through, carrying only 8 words, seriously. This feels personal. You could have told us. I wasn't surprised, not really, because a part of me had always known this moment was inevitable, the moment they realized I had finally chosen a life that didn't center their feelings, their needs, their comfort zones. What I hadn't expected, though, was how cleanly it would slice through everything I had built, not because it made me doubt myself, but because it confirmed everything I had worked so hard not to believe for the better part of my life. I stared at that message for a long time, the words seeming to glow brighter with every passing second, as if the silence between us had finally been given a voice, cold, passive-aggressive, and steeped in the same kind of shallow disappointment she used to reserve for when I brought home a B instead of an A, or when I dared to tell her I didn't want to go to Jake's graduation dinner because I had finals the next morning. There was something about the phrasing, "this feels personal," that stuck to my skin like smoke. As if I had committed a sin not by buying a place, not by being successful, but by doing it without her involvement. As if my independence was a betrayal of the script she'd spent years convincing herself I was following. I didn't answer right away, because to respond too quickly would have meant I still needed her to understand, and I didn't, not anymore. Instead, I left the message there, unread but seen, sitting in my notifications like a ticking clock I no longer felt any obligation to reset. I went for a walk along the beach instead, toes dragging in the cool sand, salty wind pushing against my face while the waves rolled in with the kind of rhythm that makes you feel both small and permanent at the same time. And as I walked, I replayed every moment that had led us to this quiet battlefield, each one clearer now in the rearview, sharpened by distance and the absence of apology. I remembered the day Jake crashed Dad's car when he was 22, high as hell on something he later refused to name, and instead of rage or consequences or even the basic accountability most parents would insist upon, there was only quiet concern. Hushed voices behind closed doors, and a therapist they paid for without blinking, followed by a week-long reset trip to the mountains where he could clear his head. I remembered watching Mom hover over him like a nursemaid while Dad picked up pieces of the bumper in the driveway, his face blank, his mouth set in that familiar, unreadable line. When I asked later why they weren't angrier, Mom sighed, rubbed her temple and said, "Jake's going through a lot. We just need to support him right now." But when I got a parking ticket 2 years later because I couldn't leave work on time and missed moving my car, she lectured me for 15 minutes about responsibility and consequences, ending with, "You're too smart to make careless choices." Like this. The double standard wasn't just present, it was deeply embedded into every interaction, every decision, every memory I had of our family. And yet, for years, I had convinced myself that if I just kept being good, kept being the one who remembered birthdays, who sent thank you cards, who showed up when no one else did, they would eventually see me, not just as the shadow of their favored son, but as a whole person with needs, desires, and accomplishments that mattered on their own. But they never did. And that message, so small and so carefully phrased, was proof that the only version of me they could accept was the one that stayed conveniently in the background. The moment I stepped into the light quietly, confidently, without seeking their blessing, they flinched, not because I had done anything wrong, but because I had done something entirely on my own. Later that night, she called. I watched the screen light up, her name still saved under Mom, like I hadn't outgrown that label years ago in every way except technically. I let it ring. Then ring again. And finally, go to voicemail. When the chime sounded, I almost didn't listen, but something in me was curious, morbidly, maybe, like watching a storm roll in even when you know it's going to ruin the day. Her voice was steady, rehearsed, that specific brand of composed hurt she used when she wanted to sound concerned without admitting to any wrongdoing. "I don't know who you think you are lately," she said, and I froze, not out of guilt, but out of awe. She really believed this was about me changing. But this attitude? This distance? It's not you. We always did our best, and I don't think it's fair for you to act like we didn't love you. Jake's had his struggles, and we supported him because he needed us. That doesn't mean we didn't care about you too. I listened to the whole thing, then played it again, each word revealing more about what she feared than what she understood. Because this wasn't about my apartment, or the photo, or the fact that I didn't tell them. It was about the fact that for the first time in my life, I had taken something beautiful, something expensive, significant, irreversible, and I hadn't handed it to them for approval or praise. I hadn't offered it up for dissection or comparison. I had simply owned it. And to her, that felt personal. Because she couldn't take credit for it. Because she couldn't shape it. Because it didn't fit into the story she had spent 3 decades telling herself about our family, that Jake was the complicated one, the one who needed help, and I was the strong one, the one who didn't. But I wasn't interested in correcting her anymore. I wasn't interested in dissecting that voicemail or crafting the perfect response that would explain why her words hurt without turning it into a fight. I was done being the translator for my own pain. So I did something I had never done before. I didn't reply. I didn't call back. I didn't soften the moment with kindness. I deleted the message, set my phone to do not disturb, poured myself a glass of wine, and opened the balcony doors to let the night air in. And for the first time in my entire life, I felt what it meant to be fully alone and completely at peace. I didn't need her permission to be proud. I didn't need her understanding to validate the choices I'd made. And most of all, I didn't need to explain why the silence was no longer a punishment, it was a boundary. A boundary she had crossed for the last time. I always thought closure would arrive like a slammed door or a shouted final word, something clean and definitive, something I could point to and say, there. That's when it ended, but instead, it came in the form of something infinitely quieter, slower, and more unnervingly permanent, like the way a tide pulls back without fanfare, revealing the emptiness it leaves behind. Not to punish, but to remind you that some absences are intentional and, in the end, necessary. It didn't happen the night my mother sent that message, nor the night she left the voicemail that tried to package a lifetime of unfairness into 2 minutes of polished denial. It came later, days after the dust had settled. In the stillness of a morning where the air was salt-thick and the sun warmed the floor under my bare feet as I moved through my apartment with a kind of steadiness I hadn't known I was capable of. There was no chaos in the silence. No need to defend, explain, or backpedal. Just peace, a peace that came not from resolution, but from the clarity that resolution was never going to come, at least not from them. I didn't need them to understand me anymore, didn't need their approval like I once believed I did. Somewhere in the space between their disappointment and my silence, I had outgrown the story they'd written for me, the one where I existed as a supporting character in Jake's saga of constant rescue and conditional love, where my competence was both a gift and a disqualifier for affection. I had started to understand that what they wanted wasn't fairness. They wanted familiarity, predictability, a daughter who played her part, who kept her head down and kept being grateful for the crumbs of recognition tossed in her direction whenever it was convenient or guilt-driven. But I was done performing that version of myself. I had stepped out of that role the moment I bought this place without telling them, and the longer I stayed here, surrounded by light and space that asked nothing of me but to live honestly within it, the more that old identity felt like a costume I had outgrown long before I realized I was still wearing it. Lauren came to visit that weekend, her suitcase rolling behind her like a soft drumbeat down the breezeway, her sunglasses perched atop her head like she was ready to critique the place, but secretly already impressed. When I opened the door, she stepped inside and immediately said, "This doesn't look like running away. This looks like arriving." And I smiled, because that was exactly what it felt like, not escape, not rebellion, but a return to something I had never been allowed to claim before. Myself in full. We spent the weekend doing nothing remarkable, walking the beach in oversized sweaters, drinking wine on the balcony while the wind tangled our hair, eating overpriced brunch from the little spot down the block that served mimosas in jars and didn't care if you sat there for 2 hours just talking about everything and nothing. I told her everything about the message, the voicemail, the aching quiet that followed, and she listened without flinching, without offering easy answers or sympathetic cliches. She just nodded, laughed where it was absurd, swore under her breath when it was infuriating, and at one point reached over, touched my arm, and said, "You didn't hurt them by doing this. You just stopped letting them benefit from pretending you didn't matter." And that, in all its simple truth, was what finally clicked everything into place. Because for so long, I had made myself small to keep the peace, to keep the illusion intact, to make their guilt manageable and their favoritism easier to deny. But the moment I stepped into something for myself, something undeniable and beautiful and wholly mine, they couldn't look away anymore. They couldn't downplay it. They couldn't twist it into a narrative where I was the lucky, low-maintenance daughter who didn't need much. Because I had something now that they couldn't explain away. A life. A home. A decision made entirely without them. When Lauren left, she hugged me tightly, kissed my cheek, and whispered, "Let them sit with it." And I knew I would. I wasn't going to reach out first. I wasn't going to soften the truth for them. Because for once, it wasn't about them at all. The real shift came a few days later, quiet as a breath, when I logged into social media out of habit and noticed, without even searching, that my mother had unfollowed me. No message. No call. No announcement. Just a silent click somewhere in the background, an erasure that was both petty and profound. And instead of feeling rejected, I felt released. I stood in my kitchen, hands wrapped around a cup of coffee, and I smiled, not out of spite, not out of triumph, but because I finally understood that the thing I had always wanted, the thing I thought I had to earn by being good, by being quiet, by being endlessly patient, was never something they could give me. The validation I had been chasing since childhood wasn't waiting for me in one of their reactions, and it wasn't going to be found in their eventual acknowledgement or a long overdue apology. It had been here all along, in every decision I had made for myself, in every boundary I had drawn, in every moment I had chosen to keep walking instead of waiting for them to catch up. And yes, sometimes I still think about what it would have felt like to have parents who celebrated my wins instead of resenting them, who saw my success as something to be proud of instead of something to compete with, who recognized that being the strong one doesn't mean being the invisible one. But I also know now that I don't have to live in that grief forever. I've mourned the family I didn't get. I've stopped trying to reframe their choices into something less painful. And I've learned that sometimes, the most radical act of love you can offer yourself is to stop explaining your worth to people committed to misunderstanding it. So no, it was never about the apartment, not really. It was about the principle, the boundary, the moment I stepped off their stage and built a home of my own, not just in wood and stone and ocean views, but in self-respect, in clarity, in the unwavering knowledge that I do not need to earn the right to exist fully. I haven't spoken to my mother since. And maybe I will someday. Or maybe I won't. There's no grand conclusion here, no tidy ribbon to wrap around this chapter. Just a woman, standing barefoot in the home she bought with money no one thought she'd earn, sipping coffee as the waves whisper their approval and the silence, at last, feels like something she chose. Because sometimes, the cleanest revenge isn't loud, isn't cruel, and isn't even called revenge at all. Sometimes it's simply living well, living freely, and letting the absence of your voice say what 1,000 words never could.